Hello friends, welcome aboard the Sleepy Fairy Tale Express. I'm the Red Mermaid. This train is a dream journey to fairy tale land. Have you all got your train tickets? Subscribe and hit the like button to always be able to ride. Close your eyes, prick up your ears, and listen in a comfortable position. Today's story is The Fisherman and His Wife. Once upon a time, in a small village spread by the blue sea, there lived a fisherman in a little pigsty right next to the beach. The fisherman lived peacefully with his beloved wife and a few black pigs. Although the fisherman's house was old and small, it was a warm nest for him. Every dawn, before the sun even rose, the fisherman would take his old fishing rod and leave his house. His fishing rod was long, made of wood, and its handle had become smooth and shiny from years of use. He would walk to the beach, listening to the sound of the waves breaking, and gazing at the palette-like landscape swaying in the wind. The sand on the beach was soft and warm, slightly hollowing under the fisherman's steps. He would cast his fishing rod towards the sea, quietly enjoy the ripples, and savor his alone time. Each day began this way for him, sustaining his life through fishing. Fishing was a part of his life, a daily challenge he faced. Thus, he fished and fished, continuing his day. Even in such a simple life, the fisherman felt a special satisfaction, and the sea always brought him new hopes and joys. On a beautiful morning, as the sunlight sparkled over the clear sea, the fisherman sat quietly on a small rock at the beach. His fishing rod shimmered in the sunlight, casting his shadow over the tranquil sea. The fisherman calmed his mind as he watched the slow movement of the waves, and a cool breeze tickled his cheeks. His eyes moved back and forth, following the shimmering in the water, enjoying every moment. And so, he sat quietly and enjoyed fishing. Suddenly, the fishing line started to be pulled deep into the water. Struggling with the water's flow, the fisherman quickly grabbed his fishing rod, his hands firmly holding it while his arms strained to maintain balance. Amidst the tension, he carefully pulled the line. Finally, a large blue flounder burst out of the water. The flounder, with its long and wide fins, shone silver under the beach's sunlight. The flounder wrestled with the fisherman for a while. As it burst out of the water, it sprayed droplets around, but the fisherman, with great effort, pulled the beautiful fish from the depths. When the fisherman had managed to pull the large flounder out, something unexpected happened. The flounder began to speak. Its voice seemed smooth and enchanting, echoing from the water. "Listen, fisherman, please save me," said the flounder. Its eyes were filled with sadness and earnestness, and its fins trembled slightly with tension. The flounder continued, "I am not truly this form. In fact, I am a prince under a spell. One day, a wicked sorcerer transformed me into this. Killing me in this sea will do you no good. I won't even make a decent meal, so please, return me to the water." The fisherman was filled with surprise and curiosity. The slippery flounder in his hands seemed to beg for life. Such a mystical event was never something the fisherman could experience in his ordinary life. The flounder's silky scales shone even more under the sunlight, and its eyes displayed human-like emotions. The fisherman began to seriously contemplate at that moment. The fisherman, after hearing the earnest plea from the flounder, paused to think for a moment. However, soon a smile appeared on his lips, and he said, "All right, there's no need for many words, a talking fish must be set free." His voice was warm and kind. He gently lifted the flounder with both hands and released it back into the loving embrace of the clear blue sea. The flounder seemed to regain its freedom, wriggling its body and slowly disappearing into the deep waters. The fisherman watched as the sunlight danced through the water. The fisherman slowly turned and walked back to his small house, the very house with the pigsty. Along the way, the trees swayed in the wind, and the waves continued to gently sweep the sandy beach. On the way back, the fisherman pondered the extraordinary encounter he had just experienced. How could a fish talk? And what might the prince's story be? When he arrived home, the fisherman approached his wife, eager to share his day's experiences. His heart was still filled with the mysterious tale of the flounder. As he crossed the threshold, the pigs greeted him, and his wife was inside, waiting for his return. The fisherman prepared to unfold the day's story in detail to his wife, looking forward to her reaction as he entered the house. As the fisherman entered the house, he saw his wife bustling around the kitchen. She was holding a pot, and her face showed the fatigue of the day. Upon seeing her husband, she immediately spoke, "Husband, did you catch no fish today?" Her voice mixed a little expectation and concern. The fisherman hesitated for a moment before quietly answering, "No." He looked into his wife's eyes and continued carefully, "I caught a flounder, but it claimed to be a prince under a spell, so I let it go." His words carried a hint of apology and the wonder of the story. The wife paused, her eyes widening as she stared intently at her husband. She put the pot down on the sink and asked, "A prince under a spell?" Her voice was a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. The fisherman nodded and began to elaborate on what the flounder had told him. The wife listened intently to the fascinating story, curious about how such a mystical event could unfold in their modest lives. As the fisherman concluded the story, he cautiously observed his wife's reaction. She seemed to be lost in thought for a moment, and a new dream or wish seemed to slowly take place in her eyes. The wife spoke, "Didn't you wish for anything first?" Her voice mixed anticipation and a slight reproach. The fisherman spread his hands humbly and answered, "No," he said simply. "What could I have wished for? His voice was innocent and straightforward. However, the wife seemed unsatisfied with his response. She sighed deeply and said, "Oh, husband, it's really hard to keep living in this smelly, disgusting pigsty." Her eyes moved back and forth between her husband and the house, revealing her deep discontent. She continued, "You could have wished for a small cabin for us. Go back and call it. Ask for a small cabin, surely it will give it." The fisherman appeared to ponder for a moment, his face marked by agony. "Ah," he reluctantly responded. His heart was filled with mixed emotions. He had thought the encounter with the magical flounder was just a fortuitous event and that he should not have any greater expectations, but hearing his wife's earnest wish made him waver. The wife looked into her husband's eyes, waiting for his decision. Her expression was resolute, and her desire was clear. The fisherman steeled his resolve to fulfill his wife's wish and decided to go back to the sea to call upon the mystical flounder again. Prepared to face any challenge to fulfill her wish, he was ready to take any risk. The fisherman reluctantly nodded in agreement to his wife's strong argument. "Why must I go back there?" he asked. His voice was filled with anxiety and hesitation. The wife looked directly into his eyes and firmly replied, "Because you caught him and let him go, so he will surely do it. Go now." Her voice was full of conviction, and her gaze was more intense than ever. The man stood still for a moment. He still did not want to go, but he did not want to contradict his wife either. An inner conflict arose within him, and he took a deep breath. In the end, he decided to fulfill his wife's wish and went back to the sea. The road to the sea was quiet and still. The fisherman's steps were heavy, and his mind was cluttered with complex thoughts. As the sea drew closer, he listened to the sound of the waves and revisited his decision. Would he meet the mystical flounder again this time? And could the flounder truly grant his wife's wish for a small cabin? The fisherman arrived at the sea. It was the same spot where he had last encountered the flounder. The sea was peaceful and calm. He took a deep breath, looked at the sea, and quietly began to call the magical flounder. When the fisherman arrived at the sea, the appearance of the sea had distinctly changed. The usual blue hue was gone, and the sea was now dyed in mystical green and yellow, reminiscent of spring grass and autumn skies. These exotic colors spread softly over the sea, blending with the undulating waves to create a fantastical scene. The fisherman gazed at the transformed sea and took a deep breath. With a fluttering heart, he shouted, "O flounder of the sea, please come here. My wife, the good Isabel, does not abide by my wishes." His words echoed over the sea and spread far with the waves. At that moment, the sea began to shine more intensely, and a slight ripple under his feet seemed to respond. Upon the fisherman's call, the mystical flounder slowly revealed itself from the deep waters. Its body was covered with even more sparkling scales than before, and its eyes looked deep and wise like the sea. The flounder approached the fisherman quietly, responding to his call. "Yes, what does she want?" The fisherman took a deep breath and cautiously spoke. "Ah," he began, "I caught you, and my wife really should have wished for something. She no longer wants to live in a pigsty, she wants a cabin." His voice was pleading, and his gaze conveyed sincerity to the flounder. The flounder looked at the sea for a moment, then turned its eyes back to the fisherman and said, "Go," the flounder spoke. "She already has it." Its voice was calm and filled with assurance, as if magical power could be felt. Stunned, the fisherman stood momentarily speechless. "Really?" he thought to himself. He thanked the flounder and hurried back home to verify if the flounder's words were true. His heart was filled with hope, and he quickly left the sea, heading towards the spot where the pigsty had been. His anticipation soared, and he was eager to see the cabin with his own eyes. As the fisherman approached his home, his steps quickened with tension and anticipation. As he walked along the familiar path, his mind continually replayed the flounder's words. "She already has it." Filled with curiosity about whether this unbelievable change had actually occurred, he finally arrived home. And the sight before him was breathtaking. Where the old, smelly pigsty had stood, there now sat a beautiful little cabin. The cabin was made of freshly painted wooden planks, and the roof was covered with dark green moss, blending with nature. Small windows invited bright sunlight inside, and two modest flower pots were placed as if welcoming at the quaint front porch. His wife was sitting on a small bench in front of the cabin, her face full of satisfaction and happiness. Upon seeing her husband, she stood up with a wide smile. "Husband," she said, "look, our new home. How is it?" Her voice was proud and joyful, and she took her husband's hand and invited him inside the cabin. The fisherman stood at the spot for a moment, gazing at the new house. Tears of emotion welled up in his eyes, filled with gratitude for the flounder's magic. He firmly held his wife's hand, and together they entered their new nest. The wife led her husband into the new cabin, pulling him inside. "Come in, see. Isn't it much better now?" Her voice was filled with excitement and joy. The husband looked around and admired her happy expression. The cabin was decorated with love and care, and each space was thoughtfully arranged to make their lives comfortable and beautiful. The small porch they entered was cozily set up, and hand-painted pictures hung on the walls. Beyond the porch lay a pretty little living room. The living room featured a sofa with soft cushions and a small coffee table, with a view of the yard through the window. The bedroom was decorated with warm-colored bedding and soft rugs for comfort, and the small kitchen was fully equipped with all necessary cooking tools. The pantry was stocked with various ingredients and spices, ready for delicious meal preparations at any time. Behind the cabin, a small yard unfolded. Chickens and ducks pecked at the grass peacefully, and next to them, a small garden with various flowers and fruit trees planted looked almost like a little paradise. The flowers bloomed beautifully in various colors, and the fruit trees bore fresh fruits. The fisherman and his wife felt a great sense of satisfaction as they viewed the scene. The wife looked around with a wide smile. "Look," she said with a voice full of joy. "Isn't it wonderful?" Her eyes proudly surveyed every small detail of the new cabin, and each decoration seemed to fulfill her expectations and dreams. The husband watched her expression with a contented smile. "Yes," he warmly responded. "Now we can live satisfied." His voice was full of relief and happiness, truly looking forward to a peaceful and satisfying life in their new home. That evening, they prepared their first meal in the new kitchen. The table was set with simple but delicious food, and the couple quietly dined by candlelight. After the meal, they retired to bed together. Nestled in the soft bed and warm blankets, the husband turned to his wife and held her hand. They looked into each other's eyes, sharing their gratitude for this new beginning together. The next day, the wife sat quietly next to her husband, looking out the window where their small garden and yard could be seen. At the window overlooking their small world, the wife's eyes seemed to ponder something. After a while of deep thought, she finally spoke to her husband. "Listen, husband, this cabin is too small for us, and the garden and yard are small too," she cautiously expressed her thoughts. Her voice contained a new desire, and her gaze dreamed of something bigger. "The flounder could have given us a larger house. I want to live in a large stone castle. Go and ask the flounder for a castle." The husband was surprised by her words, and his expression showed mixed feelings of concern. He quietly looked at her and could read the desire in her eyes. After a moment of contemplation, he carefully replied, "But we are happy enough here. Why do we need a bigger house?" The wife listened to his words and was silent for a moment. She looked out the window again, pondering the deep desire settled in her heart. "Sometimes, in a larger space, you can dream of more possibilities," she continued. "The flounder granted our first wish. If we want a larger house, surely that's also possible." The husband cautiously presented an opposing view to his wife. "Oh, wife," he said, "the cabin is good enough. Why do we need to live in a castle?" His voice was filled with worry and anxiety. He wanted to be content with the blessings already given, fearing what consequences their excessive demands might bring. The wife felt frustrated by her husband's hesitant attitude. "What are you talking about?" she firmly said. "Just go, the flounder can always do it." Her voice was full of conviction, and she did not want to miss an opportunity to achieve a bigger dream. "No, wife," the man cautiously countered. "The flounder just gave us a cabin. Going back too soon might anger him." The husband's words mixed respect and fear for the flounder. He wanted to avoid upsetting the magical being, threatening their current happiness. But the wife lightly dismissed her husband's concerns. "Go," she repeated. "He can easily do it, and he will gladly go now." Her command left no room for argument, and her face bore a determined expression. Reluctantly, the husband decided to comply with her firmness. His heart was heavy and complex, but for his wife's happiness, he once again set out to find the flounder, heading towards the sea. He walked carefully towards the sea, considering the flounder's mood. The husband moved his heavy and hesitant steps towards the sea. His mind was filled with doubt and fear, and his inner conflict tormented him. He muttered to himself, "This isn't right," troubled by the thought of making excessive demands on the flounder. He knew the importance of harmony with nature and gratitude for what was given, yet he could not deny his wife's wishes. When the husband arrived at the seaside, he quietly looked at the sea, trying to calm his mind. He listened to the gentle sound of the waves rolling in, trying to momentarily forget his anxiety. However, his heart remained heavy, and he worried about what to ask the flounder and what the consequences might be. When the husband finally reached the sea, the color of the water was not ordinary. The surface of the water mixed mystical purple, deep blue, and gray, a stark contrast to the usual green and yellow seas. Despite this, the sea was still calm, giving a peaceful feeling. The husband listened to the quiet sounds of the sea, absorbed in his call, and quietly said, "O flounder of the sea, please come here. My wife, the good Isabel, does not abide by my wishes." His voice was serious, slightly fearful, and his call echoed over the sea. The sea seemed to respond to his words, and shortly after, the waves began to move slightly. When the flounder slowly revealed itself from the water, its eyes held wisdom and insights from a long time. Its body sparkled with a mystical light, and it spoke to the husband. "Yes, what does she want this time?" The flounder's voice was deep and resonant, echoing throughout the sea and the air above it. The husband hesitated for a moment, then, with fear mixed with his reply, said, He cautiously began, "She wants to live in a large stone castle." The flounder looked at the sea for a moment, then turned back to the husband and spoke firmly. "Then go, she is already standing at its door." The husband heard the flounder's words and was startled. He quickly rose from his place to check if a castle was indeed unfolding before his eyes and hurried home. When the husband left the sea and returned to where their home had been, the sight that unfolded before his eyes exceeded all his expectations. There, where their small cabin had once stood, now stood a majestic and massive stone palace. The palace was made of solid stone, with high towers and thick walls exuding an impressive force. The appearance of the palace was reminiscent of a castle from the medieval ages, and each stone was intricately crafted. The husband stood still for a moment, incredulously viewing this scene. His astonishment was beyond words, and he could not understand how all these changes had occurred. His wife was energetically climbing up the stairs, her expression full of confidence and satisfaction. She spotted her husband and smiled broadly, grabbing his hand. "Come in," she said. The interior of the palace was filled with splendor and grandeur beyond what they had imagined. The wide hall paved with marble overwhelmed them the moment they stepped in. The polished marble floor resonated with every step, and the large hall in the center of the palace welcomed many servants who flung the doors wide open to greet the couple. The walls were adorned with intricately carved hangings, each depicting various historical tales and legendary scenes. These hangings reminded visitors of the palace's history and grandeur. Inside, chairs and tables made of pure gold were arranged, each piece a fine work of art crafted by master artisans. Hanging from the ceiling were crystal chandeliers, scattering countless fragments of light around the room whenever light shone through them. These chandeliers emphasized the palace's lavishness, and under them, the husband and wife admired their newly found surroundings, holding each other's hands. Every room and bedroom had soft carpets laid out, muffling footsteps and adding coziness. On these carpets, their steps felt lighter. Moreover, each room's table was prepared with the finest food and wine, so rich that the tables seemed almost to collapse under their bounty. Located at the back of the palace, a vast courtyard evoked another world. There, well-maintained stables for horses and cattle were arranged, along with several top-quality carriages lined up, ready at any time for royal travel. These stables were made of wood and stone, boasting a sturdy yet elegant exterior. Further on, the immense garden unfolding before them was filled with various flowers and fruit trees. This garden offered different colors and scents each season, making it a perfect place for walks. There was also a half-mile-long park, where lush grass and dense trees allowed deer and rabbits to roam freely. This park provided a place of peace and relaxation for them. The wife led her husband towards the park and garden, saying, "Come in, isn't it beautiful?" Her voice was full of pride and happiness. She felt a great satisfaction that all this environment had become part of their lives. The husband admired the park and expressed his deep admiration. "Yes, really," he answered. Now leave it as it is. We will live satisfied in this beautiful castle." His heart was completely captivated by the beauty of the palace and its surroundings, and he was ready to fully enjoy life here. As dawn broke, the wife quietly rose from the bed. The window revealed a vast countryside landscape that captured her eyes. She approached the window and gazed at the beautiful scenery for a while. The gentle morning light illuminated the fields and forests, stirring a new desire in her heart. Her husband was still deep in sleep. She gently nudged him awake with her elbow, whispering, "Wake up, husband, look outside the window. See, couldn't we be kings of all this land? Go and ask the flounder to make us kings." The husband opened his eyes and, waking up, turned towards the window. The vast land spread before him indeed seemed sufficient to establish a kingdom. However, he was bewildered by her suggestion and hesitated for a moment. Being a king involved great responsibilities, and he feared that all the magical moments they had experienced could disappear due to such immense demands. The husband hesitated once more. "Oh, wife," he cautiously said. "Why do we need to be kings? I don't want to be a king." His voice mixed worry and unease. The husband preferred a simple life and was not ready to bear the weight of a throne. The wife resolutely replied, "Well," she said, "if you don't want to be a king, then I will be. Go and ask the flounder to make me a queen." "Ah, wife," the man again spoke cautiously. "Why do you want to be a queen?" "I don't want to tell him that." The husband felt burdened by making another significant request to the flounder. He felt they should be grateful for the many blessings they had already received and that it was not right to continue with more greed. But the wife persistently pushed her point. "Why not?" she said. "Go now, I must be a queen." The husband's steps towards the sea were heavy, and his mind was filled with anxiety and worry. When he arrived at the sea, he immediately noticed that the state of the sea was completely different. The peaceful beach had now turned into a dark, boiling sea, and the seawater seemed to start foaming as if something was stirring it from below. Wrapped in fear, the husband cautiously spoke to the sea. His voice trembled, and the chaotic natural surroundings added to his earnestness. "Oh, flounder of the sea, please come here. My wife, the good Isabel, does not abide by my wishes." As the husband anxiously awaited a response from the depths of the sea, the waters calmed, responding to his call. Soon, the flounder appeared before him, still as huge and mystical as ever. The flounder's eyes were filled with wisdom and understanding, and it listened seriously to the husband's request. "What does she want this time?" the flounder asked. Its voice was deep and resonant, vibrating through the sea and the air above. The husband took a deep breath, shaking off his hesitation and fear, and replied, "Ah, flounder," he said. "My wife wants to be an empress." The flounder looked out to the sea for a moment, then turned back to the husband and answered, "Then go to her. She is already an empress." Startled by the flounder's words, the husband hurried away from the sea and returned to the palace. His heart was filled with confusion and anticipation. When he arrived at the palace, it felt different from before. The palace was more splendid and majestic, and symbols of the empress were apparent everywhere. When the husband arrived at the grand building that looked like a church, it appeared similar to a palace from the outside, surrounded by other buildings that added to the church's dignity. He made his way through the crowd and entered the building, and the scene that unfolded inside overwhelmed him. The interior was illuminated by thousands of candles, the bright light enhancing the quiet, sacred atmosphere. The candlelight reflected off the artworks and decorations around, revealing their intricate details. The wife sat in the center on a golden throne much higher than those around, her appearance displaying the regality and authority of a queen. Her head was adorned with a large golden crown, and in her hand she held a scepter made of gold and jewels, symbolizing the empire's authority and emphasizing her power. Servants lined up on either side of her, each a head shorter than the one before, ranging from the size of giants to as small as her little finger. This bizarre arrangement visually expressed her power and the vastness and diversity of the world under her rule. When the servants opened the doors made of pure gold for the husband, he entered the interior of the palace. There, a series of lavishly decorated halls and rooms unfolded, each filled with unique and luxurious decorations. This environment felt almost fantastical to the husband, and he experienced a mix of confusion and awe at being part of such a palace. When the husband entered the central room of the palace, he directly witnessed the astonishing transformation his wife had undergone. In the middle of a hall, adorned with gold, stood an enormous throne made of gold. The throne was massive and majestic, and his wife sat upon it, exuding the regality and authority of an empress. Above her head shone a 3-yard-high large golden crown, and in her hand she held a scepter made of pure gold and jewels. This scepter was a symbol of authority for the entire empire, emphasizing her dominion. Servants lined up on either side of her, each a head shorter than the one before, ranging from the largest giant to the smallest dwarf, as small as his little finger. This bizarre arrangement visually expressed the power of the empress and the diversity and vastness of the world she governed. In front of her, dukes and princes were lined up, all showing a humble posture before the empress's authority, appearing to await her commands. This scene left a strong impression on the husband, and he felt overwhelmed by the scale of her achievements. As the husband stood among the many nobles in the grand central hall of the palace, he looked at his wife and asked, "My wife, are you now the emperor?" "Yes," she answered confidently, her voice authoritative and commanding. "I am now the emperor." He looked at her, and from deep within, he made a heartfelt request. "My wife, now that you are the emperor, please be content." His words were laden with a plea, expressing his desperate hope that she would not be consumed by any greater desires. The husband wished for her not to take any more risks or unnecessary dangers, hoping she could be happy and satisfied with what she had already achieved. However, the wife's ambition had reached its peak, and she was now eyeing another high seat of power. "Husband," she said with authority, her confidence as an emperor evident in her demeanor. "Why are you just standing there? I am now the emperor, but I also want to be the pope. Go to the flounder." Her demand sounded like an order. The husband, flustered by her relentless desires, looked at her with concern. "Oh, wife," he cautiously replied, "you cannot be the pope. There is only one pope in the Christian world. He cannot make you the pope." His attempt to curb her reckless demands seemed futile. The wife paused to think after hearing her husband's words, but her gaze still showed her unyielding will. She had a strong desire to achieve everything she wanted using her power, now aspiring to reach even a sacred position. The husband deeply worried about her boundless ambition. He feared the serious consequences of her discontent with the immense power she already possessed and her quest for an even higher position. The wife's demands became more imperious and resolute. "Husband," she commanded, "I will be the pope. Go now. I must become the pope today." Her voice sounded like she had made a final decision, and her eyes showed how strong her resolve was. The husband grew increasingly distressed by her unreasonable demands. "No, wife," he cautiously said, "I cannot tell him that. The flounder cannot make you the pope." However, the wife dismissed her husband's concerns. "Husband," she asserted firmly, "that's nonsense. If he can make me an emperor, he can make me a pope. Go to him now. I am the emperor, and you are merely my husband. Go now." Her command was absolute, and it seemed like she was testing the limits of how far she could go from her position. Overcoming his fears and worries, the husband headed to the beach. His steps were unstable, and he felt great physical pressure. His legs and knees trembled, and his body increasingly weakened. The ground was windy, and the sky was filled with swiftly moving clouds. As evening approached, everything darkened, and leaves fell from the trees, swept by the wind. The sea boiled as if it were alive, and the waves fiercely struck the coast. Yet, in the midst of the storm, a piece of blue sky still visible provided a glimmer of hope despite all the turmoil. However, the surrounding area was as intense as a severe storm, and the fierceness of nature made his heart even more fearful. Standing at the edge of the sea, amid all this natural tumult, the husband mustered great courage to call the flounder. He took a deep breath, confronted his fears, and said, "O flounder of the sea, please come to me. My wife, good Isabel, doesn't heed my counsel." When the flounder appeared through the turbulent waves and dark clouds, its presence was as mystical and majestic as always. The sea calmed briefly with its appearance, and it asked the husband, "What does she want this time?" The husband sighed deeply, weighed down with a heavy heart, and replied, he said cautiously, "She wants to be the Pope." His voice carried despair and fear, and he closely watched the flounder's response. The flounder paused, looked at the sea, then turned back to the husband and said, "Then go to her. She is already the Pope." The husband arrived at a building that looked like a grand church, which appeared to be a palace from the outside, surrounded by several structures that added to the church's dignity and formality. He made his way through the crowd and into the building, and the scene that unfolded before him as he entered was overwhelming. The inside was brightly lit by thousands of candles, and the brilliant light emphasized a quiet, sacred atmosphere. The light from the candles highlighted the fine details of the artworks and decorations around. His wife sat in the center, on a golden throne significantly higher than before, radiating a dignity and authority never seen before. She was dressed in golden robes, and on her head were 3 large golden crowns, symbolizing her status now extended to a global scale. The lavish church decorations around her visually expressed the power she wielded. The majestic hall of the church lined up with symbolic decorations representing the wife's new position as Pope. The largest, as tall as the highest tower, was a gigantic candle, and at the other end, as small as a kitchen candle, were variously sized candles burning brightly on either side of her. These candles symbolized her immense and extensive influence, highlighting the sanctity and importance of her new role. All the emperors and kings gathered in the church were kneeling before her shoes, showing respect for her status by kissing her footwear. This scene clearly demonstrated the extent of her influence. The husband, engulfed by deep emotions, approached her and asked carefully, "My wife, are you now the Pope?" His voice was a mixture of awe and reverence. "Yes," she confidently replied. "I am now the Pope." The husband looked at her and, filled with deep concern, said, "My wife, now that you are the Pope, please stop." His words conveyed his desperate wish that she no longer pursue power and be content and wise with the achievements she had already made. Although proud of her reaching such a high position, the husband also hoped that she would no longer take any risks. As they headed towards the Pope's sacred room, the wife stood rigid, her expression showing no change. Her eyes were fixed on something distant, and her thoughts delved into the depth of the high position she had now reached. The husband cautiously approached her side. "My wife, now that you are the Pope, please be content, there is nothing bigger left," he gently said. His voice carried worry and a plea, hoping she would be satisfied with the immense power she had obtained. The wife listened to her husband's words and appeared to consider them. "I will think about it," she calmly said. That night, they went to bed together, but the wife could not sleep peacefully. Unsatisfied and driven by greed, she tossed and turned all night, continually pondering how to achieve more and what she could do. As dawn broke and the red-hot sun slowly rose outside the palace window, the woman got out of bed and moved towards the window, captivated by the spectacular view. Her pupils followed the sun's movement, and she whispered, "Can't I also command the sun and moon to rise?" A relentless desire surged from deep within her, and now she felt the urge to dominate even the laws of nature. She elbowed her husband to wake him up and said, "Get up. Go to the flounder and tell him I want to be a god." Her voice was resolute, and her eyes blazed with determination. The man, unable to hide his deep astonishment, stumbled out of bed, rubbing his eyes in confusion. "Wife, what are you talking about?" His voice was filled with perplexity. "Husband," she emphasized again, "if I can only watch the sun and moon rise and can't command them, then I can't have a happy time anymore. I must be able to make them rise too." Despite the husband's pleading, the wife's ambition knew no bounds. She was dissatisfied with all she had achieved and craved more power and capabilities. The desires that sprang from the depths of her heart now dominated her. The husband knelt before her desperately. "Oh, wife," he said, "the flounder cannot do that." But the wife ignored his plea. Her anger grew uncontrollably, and she tore at her top, screaming violently, "I can't stand it! I can't stand it! Go now!" Her voice was desperate, and her behavior became increasingly uncontrollable. She kicked her husband, sending him to the flounder. The husband ran to the sea, his heart full of fear and anxiety, his steps hurried and heavy. Nature's fury was fully unleashed, and the storm raged fiercely around him. Strong winds enveloped his body, and he barely managed to stand. The environment was completely chaotic. Houses and trees were uprooted by the storm's force, mountains shook, and rocks tumbled into the sea. The sky turned pitch black, and thunder and lightning struck continuously, adding tension to the entire scene. The sea churned with giant black waves nearly as high as church spires and mountains, spewing white foam. Despite this, the husband shouted out to the flounder, but his voice was lost in the storm's noise. He felt powerless against the forces of nature, irrespective of his will. Nevertheless, he shouted again, "O flounder of the sea, please come to me. My wife, Good Isabel doesn't heed my counsel. As the storm raged fiercely, the sea suddenly calmed, and the flounder appeared again. Its presence was always mystical, and its eyes held ancient wisdom. The husband, drenched, looked at the flounder and conveyed his wife's latest demand. "What does she want this time?" the flounder asked calmly. Its voice was clear and peaceful, even amidst the storm. "Oh," the husband said, "she wants to be a god." The flounder paused before replying, "Then go to her. She has already returned to the pigsty." The husband stood there stunned, slowly realizing what that meant, and turned his steps towards home. When he arrived, he found his wife had returned to living in a pigsty, all illusions and power gone. She was back to leading an ordinary life. you.